It is quite a long question. Probably it goes some through some implementation details, but I think that is touching some interesting topics, I would say. Um, as always, take my idea on that as something I recommend, not as the truth. But let's dive into the question. So the question comes from Eastballs. And the question is, not sure if this should go here or if there are good to fetch solution for resumable slash durable streams for agents. The ideal case I describe as each agent step, generation, tool call, etc. is adorable and checkpointed as soon as it finishes. The client receives a live stream of every chunk, result, etc. For checkpointed steps, the stream has durable semantics. And for the current step ephemeral may be lost or replayed. Let me also zoom in a real more. Okay. On client disconnect, it can resume from its last consumed chunk. On server crash, on restart, automatically pick up where it left off. Interrupted step gets retried. LLM streams are restarted. Tool calls may have inner checkpointing, but may involve walking back the stream, a new LLM request, replay tool, etc. Stream is able to include these so the client can automatically discard overridden ephemeral state. Basically, the whole package for durability around agents. I'm admittedly not very familiar with cluster or workflows. From what I've seen, looking at the repo, it seems that some of the blocks are there, but workflows don't really support streams result in step for good reasons, obviously. I'm trying to model the stream as a cluster entity, so also doesn't seem like a great solution as it involves a database write on every chunk, which doesn't seem like reasonable approach. Okay, so I think that this opens for quite a few things and quite a few APIs that may be interesting to look into. I admit that I have implemented something similar in the past, not with streams, but with basically reasonable LLM agents. So I could maybe work through what would be my approach in breaking up this problem. And as you mentioned, you got the feeling that cluster and workflows already provide some of the probably the building units that you would use in order to build such an abstraction. And I definitely agree with that because let's basically try to split this problem. So as you have stated, basically an agent has steps, and the steps can be generation, they can be tool call, or something else, right? And basically what we are describing is basically a durable conversation with the agent, right? Something that can be like only one turn. The agent start, do some jobs, and then call tools, whatever, and then comes back. Or maybe it can be even like multi-turn. So I think that this opens for basically splitting the problem in many steps. We need first, I think, to define the single resumable and activities that are involved in this problem. You pointed out that we have generation and we have indeed tool calls, and I think that those ones are probably the most important ones that we will encounter. But the thing is that we need to be kind of like careful about how they are implemented, because for tool calls, it may happen that the tool call may fail or the server may crash while performing a tool call. So in order to have this durable agent, what we can do is we can do a durable agent only if all of its tools can be basically durable and uh, basically can be resumed or idempotent. Basically, whenever we have some tool calls that may crash uh, in the middle, we need to have a way for that tool call to be reperformed and be sure that it doesn't get executed twice, it doesn't get left in a half-baked state. And this is more like, I think, a problem of what are the tools that you provide to the agent. And the other part is the generation or the LLM generation, which I think if you look, if we maybe open the GitHub for effect, we'll see that the generation step, as always, let me increase the font size. Is that good enough? So one thing is the tool execution, and the other one is the agent execution. So regarding the agent execution, I think, if I recall correctly, if we go into unstable AI, we have a data structure that's called prompt. And the prompt is basically the order list of messages that your agent gets. And the thing is that you can start your agent execution either from just an initial prompt, or you can record and persist somewhere basically the last checkpoint for the entire conversation as an AI prompt. And then what you can do is that the language model has a generate text API that takes in the prompt from which we want to start, and then it starts generating the response out of that prompt. Maybe we can show here. Yeah, I was saying that we have basically the abstraction built in the Effect AI model, because what's called prompt is actually more like the previous chat history from what you want to resume from. And then from there, you basically continue your conversation. So basically, we could say that you can give an initial message, and then you can generate some text, and then you get back a response. And this response is basically the chat history that gets updated. And then that history that's now updated, you need to persist and replace the old prompt that you had initially and continue from there. So you can imagine that this simple loop can be durable, in fact, because you can consider each generation step as something that is, for example, an effect workflow activity, and then you just have activities that may generate a portion of the text. They may be even able to stream it, but what you persist is basically the entire chunk of step of the generation of the text. And then what you get back is basically the response that the LLM gave. And the response may contain like conversation pieces, like the reply that the LLM gives, but the response may also contain elements such as invoking a tool. And the interesting part is that Effect AI as a disabled tool call resolution parameter that can be provided. And when we provide the disabled tool call resolution parameter to true, what happens is that that call to generate text won't execute the tools. It will just return in the response the actual structure that contains the tools that needs to be invoked. So what you can imagine that you can do is you can create an effect workflow where you can basically loop, starting from the initial message. You generate the initial chunk of the LLM text, and then what you do, you grab back the response with the disabled tool call resolution set to true. You then extract, by using the prompt module, you can extract the tool calls to execute from the response. You can do the execution yourself, and then you can do the execution of those tools as basically activities, and then you fed back the result of those tools back into the AI prompt history. And then you can just basically loop into the forever in order to achieve that. And the question got one correct point, I think, is that you can do this basically both with a cluster workflow or with a cluster entity. Because if you think about it, we can either have like a conversation entity, or we could have like a conversation workflow. Both works. They have, in my opinion, like different capabilities, because as you mentioned, if it is modeled like a workflow, it is easier to write because it's basically a while through loop that performs the single step, but it has the downside that it cannot stream things as they happen, because a workflow is a workflow. It has an execution, it starts. If you want to stream something, you would have to add like a side stream that gets fed as the workflow gets executed. Or the other approach could be building it as a cluster entity. And building it as a cluster entity would allow you, for example, to have the same approach of basically persisting each step yourself, and then you loop into the execution. But what you can do with an entity is that you can feed like a pub sub with events as things happen. So you can have on the same cluster entity methods that provide a subscription to set PubSub, and those will stream back the results as the execution of the entity works, while still having that durable feel, because again, with the cluster entities, you can decide when to acknowledge messages. So when to decide that the entity basically has finished is processing, and you can use entity.keepalive true or false to basically pilot if you want the entity to shut down or be kept alive. And the only thing is obviously that you would have to manage yourself the persistence of the chat history. That is not difficult, but then again, it depends on what is the thing you would use this durable entity for. I would also say that depending on your AI provider, if you are maybe not using Effect AI module, you can also like probably get something better, because if your AI provider provides resumable streams, because I've seen that some provider are starting to do that, you can take advantage of that and then have just an entity that delegates that. You can also have a mixture of both, because you may have like a cluster entity that does the orchestration, but then you can execute your tools as workflows. So you can like trigger the execution of workflows and then wait back for the result to come. So I think that there is quite a few of opportunity in here that can be explored. I think that they are mostly all valid solution. It really depends on what are you using your durable agent for. If you plan, for example, for a durable agent that doesn't have a long history, and maybe it's not too much interactive, going for the workflow only solution works. Because again, the problem with the workflow solution is that every time we spun up again the workflow, we basically replay the activities. And that means that if the chat becomes very, very, very long, that means that you will need to replay the entire history. But usually, I think with the LLM use case, that's not the case because again, giving the LLM a huge like conversation as a context, usually it's not good. Um, but yeah, I hope that this covers some of the ideas on how this could be implemented. And I did indeed the feeling that the building blocks are already there is real. I think it's not just there as a standard solution because again, there are not yet full standard that describes. At least as far as I know, other people in the team may be more aware of that. But as I know, there is no standard solution on how you should describe a durable AI chat in that meaning, protocol wise. I would mean. Okay, so let's see if we have other questions. Hoping that I have like given like overall about that.